The hammer struck the wood with a finality that echoed across the empty fields. A foreclosure notice, stark and white against the weathered fence post, fluttered in the dry wind. Samuel's hands trembled as he gripped the splintered wood, his knuckles white with a fury that had nowhere to go. The banker, a man in a crisp suit that seemed obscene against the backdrop of dust and death, adjusted his tie and delivered the verdict with cold efficiency. "It's over, Samuel." 2 words. That's all it took to bury a lifetime of work, generations of legacy, decades of sunrise labor and sunset prayers. The fields stretched out behind them, a graveyard of broken stalks and cracked earth, a testament to 3 years of drought and mounting debt. But something else caught the eye in that moment of devastation. Under the twisted branches of a dead oak tree at the edge of the property sat a figure, a stranger, silent, still, watching the scene unfold with eyes that held no judgment, no pity, just an impossible depth of calm. The stranger's presence was like a question mark written in the dust, a punctuation in the grammar of Samuel's collapse that made no sense, yet felt somehow essential. He sat there as if he'd always been there, as if he were part of the landscape itself, woven into the fabric of this dying place with invisible threads. What would you do when you've lost everything, and all you have left is a single act of kindness? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and tell us which city you're watching from. And if you believe that hope can be found in the most unexpected places, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next. The Whispering Creek Farm had once been the pride of the county. Samuel's grandfather had broken this ground with his own hands, turning wild prairie into fertile rows of corn and wheat. His father had expanded it, built the red barn that still stood, though its paint had long since surrendered to the elements. Samuel had inherited it all at 25, young and full of dreams, certain he would pass it on to his own children one day. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The drought came first. 1 year of low rainfall they could weather. 2 years tested them. 3 years broke them. The crops failed, the livestock had to be sold, the loans came due. And now, at 50 years old, Samuel stood on land that had been in his family for 3 generations and watched it slip through his fingers like the dry soil that refused to hold anything anymore. The farmhouse reflected the state of everything else. Paint peeled from the siding in long, sad strips. The porch sagged like a tired old man. Inside, the rooms were mostly empty. Furniture had been sold piece by piece to buy seed for crops that never grew, to pay interest on debts that only multiplied. What remained were the bones of a life, the skeleton of better days. Samuel was a tall man, made taller by the weight of failure that bent his shoulders forward. His face, weathered by sun and wind, bore the map of sleepless nights and worried days. His eyes, once bright with the optimism of a young farmer, had grown dull, skeptical, hardened by disappointment. He had stopped going to church 2 years ago. God, he had decided, had either forgotten him or never cared in the first place. Prayer was for people who still had something to hope for. The stranger under the oak tree seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. Samuel hadn't seen him arrive. One moment the tree stood alone in its death. The next moment the old man sat beneath it. He was perhaps 70, perhaps ageless. His clothes were simple, worn but clean, the kind of garments that belonged to no particular era or fashion. His face was a landscape of deep wrinkles, each line telling a story that remained unspoken. His hair, white as cotton, moved gently in the breeze. But it was his eyes that arrested attention. They were clear, unnaturally clear, like water from an impossible spring. The stranger made no move to approach. He didn't wave or call out. He simply sat there, his back against the dead bark, his hands resting peacefully in his lap, existing in a state of such profound stillness that it seemed to create a small zone of tranquility in the midst of chaos. Samuel watched the banker's car disappear down the dirt road, trailing dust like a funeral procession. The sheriff would come tomorrow morning at dawn. He had exactly 1 night left in the only home he'd ever known. The thought should have crushed him, but instead he felt a strange numbness, as if his capacity for feeling had finally reached its limit and simply shut down. He turned and walked toward the house, his boots scuffing against the hard-packed earth. But something made him stop. Perhaps it was the way the setting sun caught the stranger's white hair, turning it gold. Perhaps it was the simple fact of the man's presence, a human being choosing to sit under a dead tree on dying land for no apparent reason. Samuel found himself changing direction, walking toward the oak instead of away from it. As he approached, the stranger didn't look up. He remained perfectly still, perfectly present, perfectly at peace. Samuel stopped a few feet away, suddenly uncertain. The man showed no signs of threat, but neither did he show signs of anything else. He was simply there, as elemental as a stone or a cloud. "You picked a hell of a place to rest," Samuel said, his voice rough from disuse and emotion. The stranger's eyes lifted slowly, meeting Samuel's gaze. There was no response, no words, just that steady, clear look that seemed to see past the surface of things into depths Samuel had forgotten existed. It wasn't an intrusive look, it was simply complete. The old man saw him, really saw him. And in being seen so fully, Samuel felt suddenly, inexplicably naked. The stranger made no request. He didn't ask for food or water or shelter. He didn't explain his presence or apologize for the intrusion. He just sat there, breathing, existing, being, and somehow that silence felt louder than any words could have been. Samuel should have walked away. He had every reason to. He had his own disaster to face, his own grief to process, his own impossible night ahead. But something held him there, rooted to that spot. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the desperate human need to not face the end alone. Maybe it was something else entirely, something beyond explanation or reason. "You hungry?" The words came out before Samuel had consciously decided to speak them. The stranger's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those clear eyes. Not eagerness or gratitude, just acknowledgement, a simple recognition of the question and all it represented. Samuel felt a wave of absurdity wash over him. He was about to lose everything. The bank owned the land beneath their feet. Tomorrow morning, he would be homeless, penniless, a 50-year-old man with no future and no prospects. And here he was, offering food to a stranger. Food he didn't have, food he could barely afford for himself. But even as these practical thoughts marched through his mind in their sensible parade, his feet were already carrying him toward the house. Some impulse deeper than logic or self-preservation had taken over. He couldn't let someone go hungry on his land, even if it wasn't really his land anymore, even if he had nothing to give. The inside of the farmhouse was dim and hollow. The kitchen, once the warm heart of family gatherings, now felt like a mausoleum. Samuel opened the cabinet above the sink. One plate, one cup, one bowl. He opened the bread box on the counter. Inside sat a single piece of bread, hard and stale, the last remnant of a loaf he'd bought 3 days ago. He picked it up, feeling its weight, its inadequacy. In the corner, a water jug held perhaps 2 cups of water. The well had run dry 6 months ago. He'd been hauling water from a stream 2 miles away, carrying just enough for basic survival. This was all he had. This piece of bread. This small amount of water. His last meal. The final provisions before the end. Samuel stood there in his empty kitchen, holding his last food, facing a choice that shouldn't have been a choice at all. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to keep it. He needed it. He had earned it through years of back-breaking work and heart-breaking loss. The stranger was nothing to him, a random wanderer, someone else's problem. But his hands were already moving. He found a weathered cloth napkin in a drawer, wrapped the bread carefully, filled an old canteen with the water. His actions felt automatic, guided by something beyond his control or understanding. It was as if the decision had been made by a part of him that existed beneath the layer of bitterness and defeat. A part he'd forgotten was still alive. He walked back out into the dying light of day. The stranger hadn't moved. Samuel approached and knelt down, setting the bread and water on the ground between them. The old man looked at the offering, then back at Samuel, and for just a moment, something passed between them. It wasn't gratitude. It was deeper than that. It was recognition, a seeing and a being seen that transcended transaction. The stranger reached out slowly and picked up the bread. He broke it carefully in half and offered one piece back to Samuel. The gesture was so simple, so clear in its meaning, that Samuel felt something crack inside his chest. He took the offered bread and sat down in the dust beside the stranger. They ate together in silence. The bread was tough and nearly tasteless, but in that moment, sitting under a dead tree with a silent stranger, while the sun set on the last day of his life as he knew it, Samuel experienced something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, not hope, just presence, just being. Just this moment, neither good nor bad, just real. The stranger chewed slowly, deliberately, as if the stale bread were a feast deserving of full attention. He sipped the water with the same reverence, and in watching this simple act of receiving, Samuel felt the weight on his chest lighten just a fraction. Not much, but enough to take a full breath for the first time in what felt like months. When the bread was gone and the water finished, the stranger nodded once, a gesture of such complete acknowledgement that it seemed to encompass everything. The gift, the sacrifice, the humanity of it. Then he settled back against the tree, closed his eyes and fell into a stillness so profound it seemed more like meditation than sleep. Samuel sat there for a long time, watching the stars emerge one by one from the darkening sky. He should have been planning, packing, preparing for tomorrow's eviction. Instead, he just sat there, next to this mysterious old man who had accepted his last meal with the grace of a king receiving tribute. Eventually, Samuel rose and walked back to the house. He lay down on his bed without undressing, staring at the ceiling, expecting the familiar crush of anxiety and despair. But instead, he felt only a strange, exhausted peace. And for the first time in 3 years, Samuel fell asleep quickly and slept deeply, without nightmares or the weight of impossible problems crushing his chest. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows, soft and golden. Samuel woke with a start, momentarily disoriented. He'd slept, actually slept. The realization seemed almost as impossible as anything else that had happened. He rose, splashed his face with the last few drops of water from the basin, and stepped out onto the porch. The stranger was gone from beneath the tree. Samuel felt a pang of something, disappointment perhaps, though why he should feel disappointed by the departure of a man he didn't know and had shared only silence with, he couldn't say. He started to turn back toward the house when something caught his eye. The old well, the cursed, dry, dead well that had been the first domino to fall in his cascade of failures. He found himself walking toward it, drawn by nothing he could name. The wooden cover was still in place, half rotted and covered in dust. He'd stopped checking it a year ago. What was the point? But now his hands were lifting the cover, setting it aside. Peering down into the darkness, he knew held nothing but dry stone and dead hope. And there, impossibly, growing from a crack in the stone wall about 3 feet down, was a flower. A single perfect flower of a color he had never seen before. Not quite purple, not quite blue, shot through with threads of gold that seemed to pulse with their own light. Samuel stared at it, his mind refusing to process what his eyes clearly showed him. Flowers didn't grow in dry wells. They didn't grow in stone. They certainly didn't grow overnight. And yet there it was, vivid and alive and absolutely impossible. He reached down, his fingers trembling, and touched one velvet petal. It was real, solid, warm even, as if it held the heat of some invisible sun. He drew his hand back, a feeling rising in him that he couldn't name. Not quite fear, not quite wonder. Something between and beyond both. Samuel turned in a slow circle, looking for the stranger, needing to show someone, needing confirmation that he wasn't losing his mind. But the old man was nowhere to be seen. The property stretched out empty in all directions. Just Samuel and his dying fields, and this one impossible flower growing where nothing should grow. He spent the morning walking the edges of his land, a patrol he'd made 1,000 times, but which felt different now. He found himself looking at things he'd stopped seeing, the way a spiderweb caught the light between 2 fence posts, the track of a rabbit in the dust. Small things, irrelevant things, things that continued regardless of human suffering or success, and everywhere he looked, he half expected to see the stranger, but the old man had vanished as mysteriously as he'd appeared. By noon, Samuel was beginning to wonder if he'd imagined the whole encounter. Stress could do strange things to the mind. Despair could create companions where none existed. Maybe he'd eaten that bread himself. Maybe he'd spent the evening alone, talking to shadows. But when he returned to the oak tree, he found evidence of the stranger's presence. The impression in the dust where he'd sat, the slight disturbance of soil where his feet had rested, and something else. Something Samuel almost missed. A small, smooth stone, perfectly round, resting on a flat rock at the base of the tree. He picked it up, feeling its weight, its warmth. It felt old, ancient, like it had existed since the beginning of time and would exist until the end. Samuel slipped the stone into his pocket and walked back toward the house. The sun was climbing toward its apex. The day of reckoning was advancing. The sheriff would arrive soon. But somehow, the panic Samuel expected to feel remained absent. In its place was a strange calm, an acceptance that felt almost like surrender, but not quite. It felt more like trust, though trust in what? He couldn't say. The afternoon dragged on. Samuel found himself sitting on the porch, the smooth stone in his hand, his thumb rubbing its surface in an unconscious rhythm. He should have been doing something, preparing, packing the few possessions he had left. but he couldn't seem to move. He just sat there waiting, the stone warm against his palm. And then, in the heat of the day, he saw a figure approaching. For a moment, his heart leaped. The stranger, returning. But as the figure drew closer, he recognized his neighbor, Tom Bridger. A good man, a practical man, a man who had offered to help more than once, though there was no help that could be given. Tom climbed the porch steps, his face creased with concern and something else. Pity, perhaps, or embarrassment at witnessing another man's complete destruction. "Samuel," Tom said, removing his hat. "Heard the sheriff's coming at dawn. Wanted to check on you, see if you needed anything." Samuel looked at his neighbor, this man who had his own farm to run, his own problems to solve, and felt a wave of gratitude for the simple human decency of the gesture. "I'm all right, Tom, but thank you." Tom glanced around, taking in the empty property, the dying fields. His eyes landed on something near the oak tree. "Who's that you've been talking to? Saw someone here yesterday evening?" "Just a traveler passing through." Tom's expression shifted, becoming more troubled. "Samuel, I'm going to be straight with you because we've been neighbors for 30 years. This thing tomorrow, it's real. It's happening. I know you're hurting, and I know you're looking for something, anything to hold on to. But sitting out here talking to vagrants, it's not helping." Samuel felt a flash of defensiveness. He wasn't a vagrant, he was just a man resting. "Maybe so, but I see that look in your eye, that look that says you're hoping for something that isn't going to come." "There's no magic that's going to save this place, Samuel. I'm sorry, but there isn't. You need to face reality. Start thinking about what comes next. I can help you. Give you work on my farm. Get you back on your feet. But first, you got to let go of whatever fantasy you're building in your head." The words were kind, meant well, rooted in genuine concern, but they hit Samuel like physical blows. Reality. Face reality. Let go. The phrases that well-meaning people always offered, as if acknowledging defeat was the same as overcoming it. "I appreciate your concern, Tom. I really do." Samuel's voice was quiet, controlled. "But I'm fine." Tom looked at him for a long moment, then sighed and put his hat back on. "All right, but the offer stands. When you're ready to talk about real solutions, you know where to find me." After Tom left, Samuel sat with the sting of those words. Fantasy, vagrant, face reality. They echoed in the empty spaces of his mind, finding purchase, growing roots. What was he doing? Sitting here with a stone in his pocket, thinking about a flower that defied nature, waiting for a stranger who had disappeared. Tom was right. There was no magic. There were no miracles. There was just the hard, brutal reality of loss. The sun was beginning its descent when Samuel saw the stranger again. He was sitting on the far side of the property, near the eastern fence line, facing the dead fields. Samuel stood up, the stone clutched in his fist, and walked toward him with steps that grew heavier and angrier with each stride. By the time he reached the old man, Samuel's carefully maintained calm had cracked wide open. The stranger looked up at him with those impossibly clear eyes, and something in Samuel broke completely. "Why are you here?" Samuel's voice came out harsh, loud, nearly a shout. "To torture me with your peace, to sit there like some kind of saint while my life falls apart. Look around." He swept his arm across the devastated landscape. "It's all dead. Everything's dead. Your presence doesn't change anything. That flower in the well, it's just nature being random. It doesn't mean anything." The stranger said nothing. He just looked at Samuel with that steady, unblinking gaze. "Say something," Samuel demanded. "Tell me why you're here. Tell me what you want. Tell me something." But the old man remained silent, and in that silence, Samuel heard all his rage echoing back at him, hollow and desperate and useless. He felt suddenly, crushingly foolish. He'd invested hope in a stranger who owed him nothing, who had promised nothing, who was just an old man resting on his way to somewhere else. "I gave you my last food," Samuel said, his voice breaking. I don't know what I thought." The stranger stood slowly. He was shorter than Samuel, frailer, but in that moment he seemed to contain something vast. He reached out and placed his hand on Samuel's shoulder. The touch was warm, solid, real. It conveyed no pity, no judgment, just presence, just a silent acknowledgement of Samuel's pain. Then the old man did something unexpected. He pointed at the setting sun, that great ball of fire sinking toward the horizon. He held his finger there, steady, until Samuel looked. Then the stranger pointed at Samuel's chest, right over his heart. The gesture was clear despite its simplicity. The sun sets, but it rises again, and so can you. Without another word, The stranger turned and began walking toward that setting sun. Samuel watched him go, his old legs carrying him steadily across the broken land. The golden light seemed to embrace him, making his white hair glow. He walked and walked until he was just a small figure on the horizon, and then he was gone, disappeared into the glare and the distance. Samuel stood there alone, his hand over his heart, where the stranger had pointed, feeling the steady beat beneath his ribs. Proof of life, proof that despite everything, he continued. The stone in his other hand seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, warm and steady. He walked back to the house as the last light faded from the sky. This was it. The last night. Tomorrow at dawn the sheriff would arrive. Tomorrow this life would end. Samuel accepted it now with a finality that felt almost peaceful. He had done everything he could. He had failed, but he had also, in his last days here, given his last bread to a stranger. That had to count for something, even if only in his own heart. He didn't try to sleep. He sat on the porch in the darkness, watching the stars wheel overhead, those ancient lights that had witnessed countless human sorrows and continued burning regardless. He thought about his grandfather, breaking this ground, his father, building the barn. All that work, all that hope, all that life, gone now, reduced to a foreclosure notice and an empty house. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. The night was utterly silent except for the occasional whisper of wind through the dead stalks in the field. Samuel found himself praying, though he wasn't sure who he was praying to or what he was asking for. Not salvation. It was too late for that. Maybe just peace. Maybe just the strength to walk away with dignity. The horizon began to lighten. Dawn. The appointed hour. Samuel stood and walked to the edge of the porch, preparing himself for the sound of the sheriff's car. The official end of everything. The sky turned from black to deep blue to violet. The sun would break the horizon any moment now, and then it came. But not the way Samuel expected. The first ray of sunlight touched the dead oak tree where the stranger had sat, and the tree, which had been grey and lifeless for 2 years, suddenly began to glow. Not with reflected light, but with light from within, as if every cell of dead wood had become a tiny lamp. The golden glow pulsed once, twice, and then exploded outward in a wave that Samuel's mind could barely process. The light flowed across the ground like liquid fire, like molten gold poured from heaven itself. It spread from the oak tree in all directions, racing across the dead fields with impossible speed, and where the light touched, everything changed. The dead cornstalks, those brittle brown remnants of failure, began to straighten, but they didn't turn green. They turned gold, real gold, metallic, solid, gleaming gold that caught the rising sun and magnified it 1,000 times. Each stalk rose like a resurrection, lifting from death into something beyond life, beyond nature, beyond explanation. Samuel stumbled off the porch, his legs barely holding him. He ran toward the field, his boots kicking up the dust that was now sparkling with gold particles. The earth itself was transforming, the cracked grey soil becoming rich with golden flecks that glittered like stars fallen to earth. He reached the first row of transformed corn and grabbed a stalk with both hands. It was cold and solid and impossibly heavy. Gold, actual gold. He pulled on it, but it was rooted deep, as permanent as if it had been planted there by the hand of God himself. The transformation was spreading, rolling across acre after acre of his property, turning everything dead into everything precious. The sky was fully light now, and the field blazed with such intensity that Samuel had to shield his eyes. Tears streamed down his face, tears of shock, of disbelief, of a joy so overwhelming it felt painful. His mind couldn't grasp what was happening. This couldn't be real. This violated every law of nature, every rule of reality. Yet his hands told him it was real. His eyes confirmed it. The cold weight of gold beneath his fingers was undeniable. He heard a car engine and turned to see the sheriff's vehicle coming up the road, the banker's car right behind it. Samuel stood in the middle of his field of gold, covered in golden dust, his hands wrapped around a stalk of solid, precious metal, his face wet with tears of pure awe. The cars stopped at the edge of the property. Doors opened. The sheriff and the banker emerged, and Samuel watched as their faces went from professional neutrality to complete, speechless shock. They walked toward him like men in a dream, their mouths open, their eyes wide and disbelieving. The sheriff reached Samuel first. He looked at the golden cornstalk, reached out tentatively to touch it, then jerked his hand back as if burned. What? How? The banker, A man who had seen everything, who prided himself on never being surprised, fell to his knees in the golden soil. He picked up a handful of earth, letting the gold-flecked dirt run through his fingers. "This is impossible," he whispered. "This is completely impossible." Samuel looked at both men, and despite everything, despite all the fear and anger he'd felt toward them, he felt only compassion. They were witnesses to something that defied their understanding of how the world worked. They were watching reality break its own rules. "The debt," the banker stammered, still on his knees. "The debt is... if this is real..." He couldn't finish the sentence. The sheriff looked at Samuel with something like fear in his eyes. "What did you do, Samuel?" Samuel shook his head. "I didn't do anything. I fed a stranger. I gave him my last piece of bread." The words sounded insane even to his own ears, but they were true. They were the only explanation he had. He had performed one simple act of kindness, and the universe had answered with a miracle that transcended explanation. The banker struggled to his feet, brushing the golden dust from his expensive suit with trembling hands. I need to... This changes everything. We need experts, geologists. We need to verify." His voice trailed off as he stared at the field that stretched out in golden rows, each plant a testament to the impossible. The sheriff took Samuel's arm, not roughly, but as if to steady himself. "Where's the stranger? The man you mentioned?" Samuel looked toward the horizon where the old man had disappeared into the sunset. "He's gone. He just walked away." They stood there for a long time, three men at the center of a miracle, trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. The sun climbed higher, and the golden field blazed brighter, a beacon visible for miles around. Within hours the news would spread. Within days the world would know. But in that moment it was just the three of them, standing in the physical manifestation of grace. The months that followed were a whirlwind that Samuel navigated with a calm that surprised even him. The scientists came with their instruments and tests. They confirmed what the eyes already knew. The corn was real gold, pure and valuable, rooted so deep in the earth that extraction would be nearly impossible. The field itself had become a treasure beyond measure. The government wanted to claim it. The bank wanted to own it. Investors wanted to buy it. But Samuel, with a quiet determination that allowed for no argument, refused them all. The field would remain as it was, a sanctuary, a testament, a physical reminder that grace existed, that kindness mattered, that the universe occasionally broke its own rules to reward a good heart. He paid his debts easily with just a fraction of what the land was now worth. The offers for his property increased exponentially, numbers with so many zeros they ceased to have meaning. But Samuel wasn't interested. The money that came from consulting fees and limited media rights was more than enough for his needs, which remained simple. The old Samuel, the broken and bitter man who had given away his last bread, was gone. In his place stood someone new, not just healed but transformed. He smiled more. He laughed easily. He looked at people with eyes that really saw them, the way the stranger had seen him. His faith, which had died in the drought, returned not as blind belief, but as unshakable knowledge. He had touched the hem of the divine, and it had changed everything. With his newfound resources, Samuel founded what he called the Hope Granary. It wasn't just a name, it was a mission, a combination food bank and seed bank designed to help farmers in the region avoid the desperate poverty he'd nearly drowned in. He hired good people, people who understood hunger and desperation from personal experience, and together they built a system of support that went beyond mere charity. Farmers who were struggling could come to the Hope Granary for food, for seeds, for tools, for advice. But more than that, they could come for hope itself. Samuel made it his practice to sit with every person who came through the doors, to listen to their stories, to see them the way the stranger had seen him, to offer not just material aid, but human connection. The Hope Granary became known throughout the region, then the state, then beyond. It wasn't just the practical help that drew people, though that was essential. It was the spirit of the place, the feeling that within those walls you were valued, you were seen, your struggle mattered. The building itself was simple, built from honest materials, but everyone who entered felt welcomed, felt held, felt somehow more fully human. Samuel's reputation grew. People called him a saint, a miracle worker, blessed by God. He always rejected these labels with a gentle smile. "I'm just a man who was hungry and desperate and broken," he would say, "and someone showed me kindness when I had nothing to give back. I'm just passing it forward." But he made one addition to his property that was purely personal, purely memorial. At the base of the oak tree where the stranger had sat, Samuel built a simple bench. It was made from reclaimed wood, sturdy and honest, designed to last. Above it, he mounted a small glass case, sealed and secure. Inside the case rested a single seed, golden and perfect, that he had found on the exact spot where the old man had disappeared. Samuel didn't know what kind of seed it was. Maybe it was just a seed, maybe it was something more, but it represented everything. The stranger, the miracle, the transformation, the truth that small acts of kindness could ripple out into waves of grace that changed everything. He visited the bench every day. Sometimes he sat there for hours, looking out over the field of gold that refused to tarnish, that remained as bright and impossible as the day it appeared. He never saw the stranger again, though he looked for him in every weathered face that came through the doors of the Hope granary. Part of him hoped to see that old man one more time, to say thank you, to ask the 1,000 questions that still swirled in his mind. But another part of him knew that the stranger would never return. That kind of grace only visits once. After that, you're meant to carry it forward on your own. People came from all over to see the golden field. Tourists, pilgrims, seekers, skeptics. Samuel let them come. He charged no admission, required no faith or belief. He simply let people see what he had seen, let them stand in the presence of the miraculous and make of it what they would. Some left shaken. Some left skeptical still, convinced there had to be a rational explanation they just hadn't found yet. But most left changed in some small way, carrying with them the seed of a possibility they hadn't believed in before. The field became a place of proposal and prayer. Young couples came to pledge their love in its presence. Sick people came to pray for healing. Lost people came searching for direction. Samuel welcomed them all. He built paths through the golden rows so people could walk among the miracle, could touch the impossible with their own hands. And at the entrance to those paths, he placed a simple sign with simple words. Grace is real. Kindness matters. Hope never dies. The seasons turned and the golden corn never changed. Winter came with its snow and the golden stalks stood firm, warm even in the coldest wind. Spring brought rain that rolled off the gold like mercury. Summer blazed and the field blazed brighter, a sun on earth. Fall painted the surrounding trees in colors that seemed drab compared to the permanent gold of the miracle field. Samuel aged well. The lines on his face deepened, but they were different lines now. Lines of laughter instead of worry, lines of wisdom instead of bitterness. His hair went grey, then white, the color of the stranger's hair. And sometimes when he looked in the mirror, he wondered if he was becoming the old man, if grace worked that way, turning the saved into saviors, the blessed into blessers. He never married. People asked why not, a good man like him, with resources and reputation. But Samuel always said he was already married, to the work, to the mission, to the memory of one perfect act of kindness that had saved his life. He had his purpose. He had his peace. He needed nothing more. The Hope Granary expanded over the years, adding programs and services, job training, counseling, medical clinics. It became a comprehensive support system, a safety net woven from compassion and funded by the fame of an impossible field. Samuel oversaw it all with quiet competence, hiring good people and then trusting them to do good work. He was no longer the broken man who had clutched his last bread with desperate hands. He was the man who had learned that giving away your last could be the beginning of having everything. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the visitors had left, Samuel would walk through his golden field. The stalks whispered to each other in the wind, a metallic sound that should have been harsh but somehow wasn't. It sounded like music, like hope given voice, like the universe singing a lullaby to its broken children. He thought about the stranger often, that old man with his clear eyes and his profound silence. Who had he been? An angel, obviously, at least in function if not in form, a messenger, a test, a gift from whatever grace powered the universe and occasionally, inexplicably, intervened in human affairs. Samuel had asked himself 1,000 times why him, why his farm, why that moment. But he'd never found an answer that satisfied. Maybe there was no answer. Maybe grace was like rain, falling where it fell for no reason except that it fell. The golden seed in its glass case never germinated, never changed. It remained perfect and suspended, a moment made eternal. Sometimes Samuel imagined planting it, wondered what would grow, but he never did. Some things were meant to be kept, not used. Some gifts were complete in their giving and needed no further action. The years accumulated like the golden dust that still sparkled in the soil. Samuel's beard grew long and white. His step slowed. His hands, which had once trembled with desperate rage, now moved with the careful deliberation of age. But his eyes remained clear, clear like the stranger's had been, clear like water from an impossible spring. He trained others to carry on the work of the Hope Granary. Young people, passionate and committed, who understood that fighting poverty wasn't just about money, but about dignity, about seeing people as fully human regardless of their circumstances. Samuel taught them by example more than by words. He showed them how to listen, really listen, how to give without making the recipient feel small, how to receive gratitude without making it about themselves. One of his protégés, a young woman named Maria who had come to the Hope Granary years ago as a desperate single mother and stayed to become its director of operations, once asked him about the stranger. They were sitting on the bench beneath the oak tree, the golden field stretching before them in the afternoon sun. "Do you think he was real?" Maria asked. "I mean really real, a flesh and blood man." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the golden seed in its case. "He ate my bread," he said finally. "He drank my water. I felt the warmth of his hand on my shoulder, so yes, he was real. But was he only a man?" Samuel smiled. "Does it matter? He was real enough to change everything." Maria nodded, understanding in a way that went deeper than words. She had her own story of transformation, her own moment when someone had seen her and valued her, when she felt invisible and worthless. That's what the Hope Granary did. It created moments of grace, human to human, simple and profound. The golden field never faded, never diminished. Scientists continued to study it, publishing papers that used increasingly complex language to describe what remained fundamentally indescribable. Some theorized about quantum anomalies, others suggested mass hallucination or elaborate hoax, but the gold remained, stubborn and real, defying explanation with the simple fact of its existence. Religious leaders from various traditions visited. Some claimed the miracle for their faith. Others saw it as evidence of universal divine presence. Samuel welcomed them all but claimed it for no one. "Grace belongs to everyone and no one," he would say. "It's not about belief systems, it's about kindness. The stranger didn't ask me about my faith, he just accepted my bread." The media eventually moved on to newer sensations, though the golden field remained a constant in certain circles. It became a pilgrimage site for some, a curiosity for others, a symbol of hope for many. Samuel was grateful when the cameras left. The work was easier in relative quiet. The genuine seekers could be distinguished from the sensation hunters. He kept detailed records of everyone the Hope Granary helped, thousands of families over the years, tens of thousands of meals served, hundreds of farms saved from foreclosure. The numbers were impressive, but Samuel knew they were just abstractions. The real story was in the individual faces, the specific moments of connection, the small transformations that happened when someone drowning in despair suddenly found solid ground beneath their feet. There was the farmer who came in with nothing and left with seeds and hope, whose farm now thrived and who sent part of his harvest back to the granary every year. There was the widow, who had lost everything and found community, who now volunteered 3 days a week helping others. There were the children who came hungry and left fed, who grew up knowing that kindness existed, that help was possible, that they were valued. Each story was a ripple from that original moment when Samuel had given his last bread to a silent stranger. The mathematics of grace were impossible to calculate. 1 act of kindness becomes 10, becomes 100, becomes 1,000. It multiplied like the loaves and fishes, an ancient arithmetic that defied modern calculation. Samuel documented some of these stories, writing them down in careful longhand in a series of leather journals he kept in his study. He wasn't sure why he did this. Maybe for future generations. Maybe just to remind himself that all of this was real, that the impossible thing that had happened to him had created this cascade of other impossible things. Small miracles leading to smaller miracles, leading to the simply miraculous fact of human beings helping each other survive. Sometimes late at night, sitting at his desk with the lamp low and the golden field visible through the window, glowing softly in the moonlight, Samuel would write letters to the stranger. He never sent them, obviously. He didn't know where to send them. Heaven? The next town over? The next dimension? But writing them helped him process the enormity of what had happened, helped him articulate the gratitude that sometimes felt too large for his chest to contain. "Dear friend," one letter began, "20 years have passed since you sat under my oak tree. 20 years since you changed everything without speaking a word. I want you to know what's happened because of you, because of your quiet presence, your acceptance of my last bread. Hundreds of families have been fed. Dozens of farms have been saved. Countless people have found hope when they thought all hope was gone. You planted something more valuable than golden corn. You planted possibility. Thank you." The letters filled a drawer in his desk, unsent and unsendable, a one-sided conversation with Grace itself. Samuel sometimes imagined the stranger reading them somewhere, somehow, and smiling that subtle smile that wasn't quite a smile, but was something deeper. The oak tree, which should have remained dead, had done something strange. New growth had appeared, just a single branch, emerging from what should have been dead wood. It bore leaves unlike any tree in the region, silver green and luminous, and once a year it produced a single flower, the same impossible flower that had grown in the well that first morning after the stranger left. Purple-blue, shot through with gold, blooming for exactly 7 days before the petals fell and turned to dust. Samuel collected those petals every year, pressing them carefully between the pages of his Bible. They never truly dried, remaining somehow fresh and vibrant even years later. He gave them away sometimes to people who needed them, to the sick, to the despairing, to those who had lost faith in everything. He never explained what they were or claimed they had power. He just gave them, the way the stranger had just accepted his bread. Grace offered, grace received. The bench beneath the tree became a place of unofficial pilgrimage within the pilgrimage. People left small tokens there, coins, flowers, written prayers, notes of gratitude. Samuel collected these weekly, reading each note with care, honoring the hope and pain and longing in each message. He kept them all in boxes in the barn, thousands of small cries from the heart, preserved and respected. One note, written in shaky handwriting on cheap paper, simply said, "I was ready to give up. I saw your field and remembered that impossible things happen. I'm still here. Thank you." It was unsigned, anonymous, just one voice among thousands, but Samuel kept it in his pocket for a year, taking it out sometimes to read when his own faith wavered, when the work seemed too big, when he felt inadequate to the task. Someone was still here because of a golden field that existed, because of a piece of bread. The chain of grace was unbreakable. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. The golden corn stood eternal within that cycle, unchanged and unchanging. It became a landmark, a reference point. Directions were given in relation to it. Turn left at the golden field. 3 miles past the miracle farm. It entered the geography, not just of the land, but of the collective consciousness. It was simply there, part of the landscape, impossible but accepted. Samuel's reputation continued to grow despite his efforts to minimize it. He was invited to speak at conferences, to share his story, to inspire others. He declined most invitations, preferring the quiet work of helping one person at a time, but occasionally he accepted, when he felt it might do some good, might plant seeds of grace in other fields. His speeches were simple, never self-aggrandizing. "I had nothing," he would say. "I was nothing, and I gave away what little I had to someone who needed it more. What happened after wasn't because I was special, or holy, or chosen. It was because kindness matters, because the universe notices when we choose compassion over despair. You don't need a miracle to do good. You just need to see the person in front of you and respond with your humanity." The audiences would listen, some skeptical, some moved, some searching for the secret formula, the magical words that would make miracles happen for them too. But Samuel had no formula to offer, just the simple truth: be kind, especially when you have nothing left to give. That's when it counts most. He watched his body age, felt the inevitable diminishment of physical strength. His knees ached on cold mornings. His eyes needed reading glasses. His hair, white as snow, thinned. But his spirit, that intangible essence that made him who he was, felt younger every year, lighter, freer, unburdened by the weight that had nearly crushed him decades ago. The Hope Granary ran smoothly now, a well-oiled machine of compassion staffed by people who truly cared. Samuel's role had shifted from operator to elder, from director to spiritual center. People came to him not for logistics but for wisdom, for the perspective of someone who had been to the absolute bottom and returned transformed. He sat more often on the bench beneath the oak, watching the golden field in all its impossible glory, feeling the smooth stone in his pocket that he'd carried every day since the stranger left. It had become part of him, this small round piece of eternity warm against his hip, a constant reminder. Young children from the nearby town would sometimes visit, brought by parents who wanted them to see the miracle. Samuel loved talking to the children because they asked the best questions, unfiltered by adult cynicism or doubt. "Why is it gold?" one small girl asked, her hand in Samuel's as they walked between the glowing stalks. "Because grace is precious," Samuel answered. "More precious than anything else in the world." "Did you find a treasure?" a boy asked. "Yes," Samuel said, "but not the kind you can spend, the kind that spends itself on others." "What did the angel look like?" another child wondered. Samuel stopped walking and knelt down so he was eye level with the child. "He looked like any old man you might see walking down the road. That's the thing about angels. They look ordinary, so we can recognize them when they appear as ourselves." The profound simplicity of these conversations fed something in Samuel's soul. Children understood grace better than adults because they hadn't yet learned to doubt it. They could accept impossible gold growing overnight because their world was still full of possibility. As Samuel entered his 70s, he began to think about succession, about what would happen to the golden field and the hope granary when he was gone. He had no children of his own, no direct heirs. But he had spiritual children by the hundreds, people whose lives he'd touched, who carried forward the work of grace. He established a foundation, drew up papers, created structures to ensure the work would continue. The golden field would remain protected, a permanent sanctuary. The hope granary would continue its mission. But more than structures and papers, he invested in people, mentoring the next generation of grace workers, showing them not what to do, but how to be. "The work isn't about the food or the seeds or the money," he told them. "Those are just tools. The work is about seeing people, really seeing them, acknowledging their humanity, their worth, their dignity. When you truly see someone, when you acknowledge them as fully human and fully valuable regardless of their circumstances, you're performing a miracle just as real as golden corn." His students listened and learned, not just from his words, but from watching how he moved through the world, how he greeted everyone the same, whether they were wealthy donors or desperate seekers, how he never rushed a conversation, never made anyone feel their problems were too small or too mundane, how he gave his full attention, the same quality of presence the stranger had given to him decades ago. The pattern was clear. Grace received becomes grace given. The blessed become the blessers. The saved become the saviors. It was an endless cycle, a perpetual motion machine powered by kindness. Samuel had been the recipient of impossible grace, and he had spent every day since becoming the channel through which that grace flowed to others. There were hard days still, days when the need seemed overwhelming, when the line at the hope granary stretched too long, when resources seemed inadequate, when the problems of poverty and hunger and despair felt too large for any solution. On those days, Samuel would walk to the golden field, would stand among the impossible corn, would touch the cold reality of the miraculous, and remember, the universe occasionally breaks its own rules. Hope is never truly lost. Grace is always possible. The golden field had another effect he hadn't anticipated. It drew artists. Painters came to capture its light. Photographers tried to freeze its impossible beauty. Poets wrote verses trying to express the inexpressible. Musicians composed pieces inspired by the metallic whisper of gold on gold in the wind. The miracle became muse, generating its own cascade of creation. Samuel allowed this, even encouraged it. Art was another form of grace, another way the human spirit reached beyond itself toward something transcendent. He hung some of the paintings in the Hope Granary, displayed some of the photographs, played some of the music. It reminded people that beauty was possible, that creation continued, that life was more than survival. One painting in particular hung in his office. A local artist had captured the moment of transformation, that first dawn when the light had spread across the dead field. She'd somehow managed to convey both the impossible radiance and the deeper spiritual reality. Looking at it, Samuel could feel again that crack in his chest, that overwhelming sense of being witnessed by something vast and loving. The artist had given him the painting as a gift, refusing payment. "You gave me something to believe in," she said simply. "This is my thanks." Another ripple, another small miracle born from the original impossibility. Time moved faster now, the way it does in later years. Seasons blurred into each other. Samuel marked time not by calendar but by harvest, by the annual flower on the oak tree, by the steady stream of people through the Hope Granary's doors. Each day was full, each day was purposeful, each day was gift. His body continued to age, but his work didn't slow. If anything, he felt more urgency, more desire to give all he could while he still could. He knew his time was finite. The golden field might be eternal, but he was human, subject to entropy and time. This didn't sadden him. It motivated him. Every day was an opportunity to be a conduit of grace. Every interaction was a chance to see someone, really see them, the way the stranger had seen him. The smooth stone in his pocket had worn even smoother over the decades of carrying. Sometimes Samuel wondered if he'd eventually wear it away to nothing, if decades more of friction might erase it completely. But it never seemed to diminish, never seemed to change. Like the golden field, it existed outside normal rules, a small impossible thing carried close to the heart. On his 75th birthday, the Hope Granary threw him a celebration despite his protests. The building was full of people whose lives he'd touched, whose trajectories he'd altered, whose despair he'd transformed into hope. They told stories, one after another, testimonies to the power of simple kindness multiplied across decades. Samuel listened, humbled and honored and slightly embarrassed by the attention. He didn't see himself as special. He was just a man who had been broken and remade, who had received grace and tried to pass it forward. But listening to the stories, he began to understand the magnitude of what had happened. Not the golden field itself, though that was magnificent, but the cascade of transformation that had flowed from one act of kindness, one piece of shared bread, one stranger's peaceful presence. When it was his turn to speak, Samuel stood slowly, using his cane for support. He looked at the gathered faces, so many lives, so many stories, so much hope born from despair. "I'm going to tell you the same thing I've been saying for 25 years, he began, his voice still strong despite his age. "There's nothing special about me. The miracle wasn't about me. It was about a simple truth. When we give from our poverty, when we share from our lack, when we choose kindness over self-preservation, we're aligning ourselves with the deepest force in the universe. Call it God, call it grace, call it love. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that it's real, it's powerful, and it's available to everyone." He paused, looking at each face in turn. "Every person in this room can perform miracles. Not golden fields, maybe, but miracles nonetheless. Every time you feed someone hungry, you're performing a miracle. Every time you see someone invisible, you're performing a miracle. Every time you choose hope over despair, kindness over indifference, generosity over hoarding, you're breaking the universe's rules in the best possible way." The room was silent, everyone holding his words like precious cargo. "So go," Samuel continued, his voice growing stronger. "Go and be miracle workers. Go and be grace bearers. Go and be the stranger under the tree, peaceful and present. Go and be the broken farmer, offering his last bread. Go and be the golden field, standing as proof that impossible things happen. Go and transform the world one act of kindness at a time." The applause was thunderous, but Samuel barely heard it. He was looking out the window at his golden field, glowing in the late afternoon sun, eternal and impossible and perfectly real. The stranger's face appeared in his memory, clear as if he'd seen him yesterday. Those wise eyes, that peaceful presence, that silent acceptance that had changed everything. "Thank you," Samuel whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for the bread we shared and the grace you embodied. I've tried to honor your gift. I've tried to pass it forward. I hope it's been enough." And in that moment, whether through imagination or some deeper reality, Samuel felt a warmth on his shoulder, the same warmth he'd felt 25 years ago when the stranger had placed his hand there. A pressure that communicated without words. "Yes, it is enough. It is more than enough. Well done." The years continued to pass, but Samuel's purpose never wavered. The golden field stood eternal. The Hope Granary continued its work. Grace flowed like an underground river, surfacing in unexpected places, transforming the landscape one life at a time. Samuel often thought about the nature of miracles. The golden field was obviously miraculous, spectacular, impossible to deny or explain away. But the quieter miracles were equally real. The single mother who found help and hope and now helped others. The farmer saved from foreclosure who now mentored struggling neighbors. The child fed regularly who grew up to become a doctor serving the poor. These were miracles too, less visible but equally profound. The golden field was the proof the exclamation point, the undeniable evidence that grace was real. But the smaller transformations were the substance, the actual work of salvation playing out in ordinary lives. Both were necessary, both were holy. The spectacular pointed the way, but the mundane did the work. In his 80s now, Samuel moved more slowly but with no less purpose. His steps were careful, measured, but they never hesitated. He still rose early, still visited the golden field each morning, still sat on the bench beneath the oak tree with its impossible silver leaves and its annual impossible flower. The golden seed in its glass case had become a symbol known far beyond his small region. People asked to see it, wanted to touch the case, hoped some of its grace might transfer to them. Samuel always allowed this, understanding the human need for tangible connection to the transcendent, but he also knew the real power wasn't in the seed or the gold or even the stranger. The real power was in the choice. His choice to give when he had nothing. The choice everyone could make every day. To see instead of looking away. To give instead of hoarding. To hope instead of despairing. That was where the real miracle lived, not in golden fields, but in human hearts that chose grace over fear. Late one autumn evening, sitting on his bench as the sun set and painted the golden field in even more impossible shades of beauty, Samuel felt a profound sense of completion. He had lived a good life, not a perfect one, not without struggle or doubt, but a good one. He had taken the gift given to him and multiplied it across decades. He had transformed a miracle into a mission, and a mission into a movement. The smooth stone in his pocket felt warm, as it always did. The golden seed in its case nearby seemed to pulse with soft light, though that might have been the setting sun's reflection. The silver leaves of the oak whispered secrets to the wind, and Samuel, old and tired and complete, smiled at the beauty of it all. If this story touched your heart, please share in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Let us know where you're watching from and what this story means to you. And to become part of our community and never miss another echo of hope, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. Finally, if you know someone who needs this message today, someone who's struggling, someone who's lost hope, share this video and help us spread the light. Because the truth that Samuel learned, the truth the stranger taught him without words, the truth the golden field proves every day is this: grace is real. Kindness matters more than you know. A single act of generosity can ripple out through time and space, touching lives you'll never meet, creating miracles you'll never witness. You don't have to be special. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to give, even when you have nothing left. Especially when you have nothing left. That's when grace steps in. That's when the universe notices. That's when impossible things become possible. That's when dead fields bloom with gold and broken lives transform into testimonies of hope. That's when you discover that the greatest treasure isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away. That's when you learn that in the economy of grace, poverty becomes wealth, loss becomes gain, and a single piece of bread shared becomes a feast that feeds thousands. Remember Samuel's story when you face your own dead fields, your own foreclosure notices, your own moments of despair. Remember that grace is always possible, miracles always available, hope never truly lost. Remember that sometimes the most important person you'll ever meet looks like a silent stranger under a tree, asking nothing, offering everything. Remember that your simple acts of kindness today might bloom into golden fields tomorrow, might save lives you'll never know about, might create ripples that extend far beyond your sight. Go now and be the miracle someone needs. Be the stranger under the tree. Be the farmer giving his last bread. Be the golden field, standing as proof that grace is real and impossible things happen to those who choose kindness over fear. The world needs your light. The world needs your hope. The world needs you to remember that even in the darkest dawn, even when all seems lost, grace is waiting to transform everything. All you have to do is give what little you have to someone who needs it more. All you have to do is choose love over fear, generosity over hoarding, hope over despair. And who knows, maybe your own fields will bloom with gold. Or maybe the gold will be something quieter, something invisible but equally precious. A life saved, a family restored, a community transformed, a chain of kindness stretching forward through time, touching lives you'll never meet, creating miracles you'll never see, proving again and again that grace is real, that hope never dies, that love always wins in the end. This is the echo of hope that rings out from Samuel's story, from his golden field, from his simple act of sharing bread with a stranger. Let it echo in your heart. Let it echo in your actions. Let it echo through your life until you become the story someone else tells about grace arriving exactly when needed most. Because that's how miracles work. That's how grace spreads. That's how dead fields bloom. One act of kindness at a time. One life transformed at a time. One heart opened at a time. Until the whole world is a golden field, impossible and beautiful and real. Until grace covers the earth like water covers the sea. Until every hungry person is fed. Every desperate person has hope. Every broken person finds healing. That's the vision. That's the mission. That's the echo of hope that will never stop ringing as long as people remember to be kind, to see each other, to give even when they have nothing left. Subscribe, share, and most importantly, go be the miracle. The world is waiting.